You
You
think
think
you
you
know
can
what
just
fear
walk in
is.
here?
Fear isn't a
Please,
shadow
I
in the
need
hallway.
mama.
Fear isn't the sound of a stranger's footstep on a dark road. Fear is watching your father die in a motel room that smells like bleach and blood, holding his hand, while the last rattle leaves his chest, and knowing that everything he ever was now fits inside a 5-pound tin box sitting on the passenger seat of a truck you can barely drive. Fear is being 16 years old alone on an interstate you've never traveled, carrying a jacket that belongs to a dead man and a promise you don't fully understand. Fear is walking into a diner full of killers and realizing that the only thing standing between you and the end of everything is a piece of leather so old it could crumble in your hands. This is the story of Ren Calloway, and the night she learned that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the thing you find at the bottom when the fear has taken everything else. The motel was called the Starlight. There was nothing starlit about it. It sat on the edge of a 2-lane road outside of Elk City, Oklahoma, a squat cinder block building with a roof that leaked in 3 places, and a neon sign that had burned out the S and the T years ago. The parking lot held 2 vehicles. One was a rusted white pickup truck with a flatbed trailer hitched to the back. On the trailer, covered by a canvas tarp and ratchet straps, sat a motorcycle. The other vehicle was an ambulance that would never come. Inside room 7, the air was thick and warm. A space heater hummed in the corner, glowing orange. The curtains were drawn tight against the November cold. On the bed, propped up by 4 pillows stolen from other rooms, lay Emmett Calloway. He had been a large man once, the kind of man who filled a doorway and made rooms feel smaller when he entered. But the cancer had hollowed him out from the inside like termites in a cathedral. His arms were roped with veins but thin as broomsticks. His chest, which had once been broad enough to carry the weight of a whole outlaw empire, now rose and fell in shallow, labored hitches. His skin had gone the color of old newspaper, but his eyes were still burning. Even now, even with death sitting on the edge of the mattress waiting for its turn, Emmett Calloway's eyes had not dimmed. They were pale blue, the color of a winter sky just before the first snow, and they were fixed on his daughter with an intensity that bordered on ferocity. Wren sat in a plastic chair beside the bed. She was small for 16. Thin arms, narrow shoulders, a face that still carried the soft lines of childhood, even as something harder was being forged beneath the surface. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a ponytail that hadn't been washed in 2 days. She held a cup of gas station coffee in both hands, not because she wanted to drink it, but because it was warm, and her hands had been cold for as long as she could remember. She had not slept in 36 hours. "Listen to me," Emmett said. His voice came out in fragments, each word a small war against the fluid in his lungs. He coughed, and the sound was wet and terrible. Wren reached for the towel on the nightstand and held it to his mouth. When he pulled away, there was red on the white cotton. Neither of them looked at it. "I'm listening, Daddy." Emmett closed his eyes. He gathered himself, summoning strength from wherever dying men find it. Under the bed, the green duffel. "Bring it here." Wren knelt and pulled the bag from beneath the bed frame. It was heavy military surplus canvas, stained and faded. She set it on the mattress beside her father's legs. "Open it." She unzipped the bag. Inside, folded with a care that seemed almost sacred, was a leather jacket. It was enormous. The leather was thick, cracked in places, darkened by decades of road grime and engine oil and weather. It smelled of gasoline and something older, something that spoke of distance and violence, and a world she had only glimpsed through her father's stories. She lifted it out. The weight surprised her. It had to be 10 pounds of leather and patches and history. The sleeves were long enough that she could have fit both arms and a third inside them. The shoulders would hang off her like a tent. On the back was a patch she had seen only once before years ago, when her father had shown her a photograph. A skeleton hand gripping an hourglass. Below it, a curved rocker that read Nomad, and below that, in smaller letters, First and 9. On the front, over the heart, a rectangular name patch. The letters were faded but still legible. "Grave digger. Put it on." Emmett whispered. "It's too big, Daddy. Put it on, Wren. And don't take it off, no matter what happens, no matter who tells you to. Don't take it off until you find the man I'm sending you to." She slid her arms into the sleeves. The leather swallowed her. She looked ridiculous, and she knew it, like a child playing dress-up in a dead man's clothes. But Emmett looked at her, and something crossed his face that she would carry for the rest of her life. It was pride and grief and a love so fierce it burned. "You look like your mother," he said, and for a moment his voice didn't rattle. For a moment it was clear and strong and young. Wren's throat tightened. She did not cry. She had done her crying 3 years ago when they buried her mother. She had cried until something inside her sealed shut, and it hadn't opened since. Emmett told her what she needed to know. Not everything. He was too weak for everything, and some things he wanted her to never know. But enough. He told her about the Ashen Saints, a motorcycle club that had ruled the western states in the 70s and 80s. Not a gang, he said, though the law never saw the difference. A brotherhood. Founded by 9 men who had nothing and no one, men who found each other on the highway and decided that the road was the only country worth belonging to. They built their own laws, their own codes, their own kind of family. Emmett had been the youngest of those 9, the enforcer, the one they sent when words stopped working. He told her about 1989, the year the federal government crushed the Saints in a RICO case that sent 37 men to prison and scattered the rest to the wind. He told her about Rowan Thorne, a young prospect from another club called the Iron Wolves. Rowan had gotten himself into trouble with the Juarez cartel in El Paso, a debt he couldn't pay. The cartel had sent men to collect. Emmett had intervened. He had taken a bullet in the shoulder and put 3 men in the ground, and when the smoke cleared, Rowan Thorne owed Emmett Calloway his life. Then Emmett told her the part that hurt. In '98, Emmett said the feds came back. They had a warrant for Rowan. New charges, fresh evidence. Rowan was building the Iron Wolves into something real, and if he went to prison, it would have died. So I took his place. I confessed to charges that weren't mine. Went away for 7 years so Rowan could stay free. Wren stared at him. "You went to prison for someone else. I went to prison for a brother." There's a difference. Emmett had told her about coming out in 2008. Starting over. Meeting her mother, a school teacher from Tulsa named Claire. Building a quiet life under a name that wasn't his. Having Wren. Watching her grow. Thinking the past was buried deep enough to stay buried. It wasn't. 3 years ago, Emmett said, and now his voice cracked. "They found us. The cartel. They'd put a bounty on me because of what I knew. What I'd been collecting. Collecting. I've been watching them, Wren, for 10 years. Writing down everything. Routes, stash houses, bank accounts, and the names of the cops and judges they own. Everything is in the jacket, sewn into the back pad." Wren looked down at the jacket she was wearing. "Your mother," Emmett continued, and now the dying man's eyes filled with tears that he did not allow to fall. "The man who came for me, he came when I was away. Your mother was alone. She fought him. She fought hard." He stopped. He couldn't say the rest. He didn't need to. "I tracked him," Emmett said after a long silence. "I found out who he was. He's Iron Wolves. A man named Kessler. Sergeant-at-arms under Rowan's VP. He took money from the cartel to find me. I took this from him." Emmett reached under his pillow and pulled out a silver Zippo lighter. It was engraved with a wolf's head pierced by a dagger, and below it, a date. October 12th, 2018. "That's a club lighter," Emmett said. 5 years of service. Custom engraving. He was careless, and I took it off him when I nearly caught him in Abilene. Keep it. It's your proof." Wren took the lighter. It was cold in her palm. "You're going to drive south," Emmett said. "Interstate 40 toward the Texas line. There's a diner called Dutch's Roadside just before the border. The Iron Wolves run that stretch of road. You'll find them there, or they'll find you. When they do, you tell them you need to see Rowan Thorne. Tell him Emmett Calloway sent you. Tell him I'm calling in the debt. He owes me a soul, and that soul is yours." Emmett coughed again. More blood, more weakness, but his eyes never left hers. "But listen to me carefully, Wren. The Wolves are not all loyal. Kessler is one of Rowan's men. There may be others. You'll be walking into a room where the man who killed your mother might be sitting 3 feet away from you, and you won't know which one he is until you show them the lighter. Trust no one except Rowan himself. And even then, trust carefully." "What if Rowan doesn't remember?" "He remembers," Emmett said. "A man doesn't forget the face of the one who bled for him." Emmett reached up and placed his hand on her cheek. His palm was dry and rough and lighter than air. "You're braver than you know, Wren. You're braver than I ever was. Your mother saw it in you the day you were born. She said you came into this world with your eyes wide open like you were already taking inventory." Emmett smiled. It was the last smile he would ever give. He died at 4:17 in the morning. The space heater was still humming. The coffee was still warm. Ren sat beside him for an hour, holding his hand, listening to the silence that filled the room where his breathing used to be. Then she stood up. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. She pulled the jacket tighter around her shoulders. And she went to work. She drove to the only cremation service in Elk City that would take cash and not ask questions. She waited 6 hours in a plastic chair in a hallway that smelled of formaldehyde and industrial soap. When they handed her the box, it was heavier than she expected. She held it against her chest inside the jacket and walked back to the truck. She placed the ashes in the passenger seat. She secured her father's motorcycle on the trailer. A 1978 Harley-Davidson shovelhead restored by hand over 15 years. Chrome and black paint and an engine that sounded like a war drum. It was worth a fortune, but to Ren, it was just the last piece of her father that still existed in the physical world. She pulled onto Interstate 40, heading south. The storm caught her 60 miles from the border. It came in fast and vicious, the way Oklahoma storms do, a wall of black cloud that swallowed the horizon and dropped the sky onto the road. Rain hammered the windshield so hard the wipers were useless. Lightning cracked and the thunder came so close behind it that the truck shuddered on its springs. Ren drove with both hands locked on the wheel, leaning forward, squinting through the downpour. She was not a confident driver under the best conditions. She had gotten her learner's permit 4 months ago and had driven exactly twice on a highway, both times with her father in the passenger seat talking her through it. Now the passenger seat held a tin box, and the only voice in the cab was the shriek of the wind. The engine coughed at mile marker 114. It sputtered, caught, sputtered again, and died. Ren coasted to the shoulder, the truck rolling to a stop with a final mechanical groan. She turned the key. Nothing. She turned it again. The starter clicked, but the engine wouldn't catch. She sat there in the dark cab, listening to the rain, feeling the truck rock in the gusts. Through the blur of the windshield, she could see a faint glow about a mile ahead. A sign maybe, a gas station, something. She zipped the jacket up to her chin. She put her father's ashes in her backpack along with the Zippo and the only other thing she had brought from the motel, a photograph of her parents on their wedding day. She shouldered the pack, opened the door, and stepped out into the storm. The mile took her 20 minutes. The rain was horizontal, driving into her face like needles of ice. The jacket was waterlogged within seconds, and the weight of it nearly pulled her sideways. Her sneakers filled with water. Her jeans clung to her legs. She bent her head and walked one foot after another, following the yellow glow. The sign said Dutch's Roadside. It was a flat-roofed cinder block building with a gravel lot, a flickering neon sign showing a coffee cup with steam rising from it, and a row of motorcycles parked under a corrugated metal awning. 12 bikes, big ones. Harleys and Indians and custom choppers with extended forks and ape-hanger handlebars. The chrome was beaded with rain. Ren stood outside for a moment, looking at those bikes. She knew what they meant. She had grown up hearing the language, even if she had never spoken it. 12 bikes meant 12 men. 12 men in a diner at the Texas border at 9 o'clock on a Tuesday night in a storm meant this was not a social gathering. This was business. She pushed open the door. The bell above the frame jingled a small, bright sound lost in the thunder. The air inside was warm and smelled of grease and bacon and wet denim and something sharp like motor oil and adrenaline mixed together. A country song was playing low on a jukebox in the corner. The diner was small. A counter with 6 stools ran along the left wall. Behind it stood a man in his 60s with a gray beard and a grease-stained apron. His forearms were thick and scarred and covered with faded tattoos. This was Dutch. He owned the place. He didn't look up right away, just kept wiping the counter with a rag that had seen better decades. Behind the register, perched on a stool like a frightened bird, sat a woman in her 40s. Mabel, the waitress. She had wide eyes and nervous hands that kept finding things to fidget with. A napkin, a straw, the hem of her apron. The center of the diner was occupied by 3 booths, and the 3 booths were occupied by 12 men. They were large, all of them. Not large in the way of men who go to gyms and count their protein. Large in the way of men who have used their bodies as weapons for so long that the muscle has become a kind of armor. They wore leather vests over flannel and denim. The vests were covered with patches, the elaborate emblematic language of the 1% motorcycle club. Colors, they called them. Their identity, their religion. The center patch on every vest showed a wolf skull with crossed pistons behind it. Below it, a bottom rocker read Oklahoma. These were the Iron Wolves, and they were the real thing. Not weekend riders, not hobbyists. These men moved methamphetamine and illegal firearms across state lines. They enforced their territory with the casual efficiency of a military unit because many of them had been military before they became outlaws. Every eye in the room locked onto Wren the moment she stepped through the door. She was soaking wet. She was shivering so hard her teeth were clicking together. She was dragging a waterlogged backpack that looked like it held everything she owned. She looked like a drowned cat that had wandered in from the apocalypse. But nobody looked at the backpack. Every eye, every single one went straight to the jacket. It was absurd. A 16-year-old girl drowning in a biker jacket that hung off her shoulders like a circus tent. The sleeves were rolled 5 times and still covered her knuckles. The leather was ancient, cracked, stained with decades of road life. It looked like she had pulled it out of a dumpster behind a thrift store and put it on as a joke. And to these men, it was an insult. In their world, leather was sacred. You didn't wear it, you earned it. Every patch, every stitch, every scuff mark told a story of miles ridden and blood spilled and loyalty proven. For a civilian to walk in wearing a leather cut was like walking into a church in a priest's robes. It was mockery, and mockery was something these men answered with their fists. Table for one, Mabel squeaked from behind the register. She didn't move. She couldn't. Her legs had stopped working the moment the girl walked in, and the biker's expressions changed. Wren didn't answer. She just nodded, her jaw clenched against the chattering of her teeth. She walked past the center booths with her eyes on the floor, trying to make herself invisible, trying to reach the far corner booth by the restrooms, where she could sit with her back to the wall and figure out what came next. She almost made it. "Check it out," said a voice from the center table. It was a young voice full of swagger and cruelty. It belonged to a man named Torque. He was 23, broad-shouldered, with a thick neck and a patchy beard. He was trying too hard to grow. He was a prospect, a recruit who hadn't yet earned his full patch. Prospects were dangerous because they were hungry. They wanted to prove themselves. They wanted the older members to see them as enforcers, as hard men as worthy. And the easiest way to prove you were hard was to find something soft and crush it. "Hey, brothers," Torque announced, turning in his seat with a grin. "We got ourselves a new member. Look at the size of her. She must ride a tricycle." The table erupted. 12 men laughing. It was a harsh sound, a predatory sound, the sound of a pack that had identified something weak. "Hey, sweetheart," Torque shouted, standing up. "Where'd you get the jacket?" "Spirit Halloween." Wren froze. She was 3 steps from the booth. She could feel the laughter on her skin like heat from a furnace. She slid into the booth, sat down and pulled the jacket tighter around herself. She didn't look up. "Leave it, Torque," a deeper voice, tired and gravelly. It came from the man sitting at the head of the center table. His name was Briggs, but everyone called him Needle because of the jagged scar that ran from his right ear to the corner of his chin, stitched together badly 30 years ago by a field medic in a bar fight. He was the vice president of this chapter. 45 years old, gray at the temples, with eyes that had seen enough violence to last 3 lifetimes. He just wanted to eat his burger and ride home. "She's a kid," Briggs said. "Let it go." "Nah, Needle, look at it." Torque wasn't sitting down. He was walking toward Wren's booth. "She's wearing cuts. She's wearing leather like she earned it. You know the code. Civilians don't dress like us. It's disrespectful." Torque was standing over her now. He was 6'3". He smelled of stale beer and chain lubricant. His shadow covered her like a blanket. "I'm talking to you, little girl." "Where'd you get the jacket?" Wren looked up. Her eyes were red-rimmed and terrified. But her voice, when it came, was steady. It came from a place deeper than fear, a place her father had built in her over 16 years of quiet, relentless teaching. It was a gift. Torque laughed. He looked back at his brothers playing to the crowd. "A gift from who? The Salvation Army." More laughter. Even Briggs cracked a thin smile. "Take it off," Torque said. The humor was gone from his voice now. It had been replaced by something harder. "You don't earn the leather, you don't wear the leather. Take it off, or I take it off for you." Dutch slammed his palm on the counter. The sound cracked through the diner like a gunshot. "Torque," She's a kid. Sit down and eat your food. Torque spun on him. Stay out of club business, Dutch. You know the rules. Stolen valor ain't just for soldiers. She's mocking us. He turned back to Ren. He reached out and grabbed the collar of the oversized jacket. Ren shrieked. It was a sharp, piercing sound that cut through every man in the room. She scrambled backward into the corner of the booth, clutching the lapels with white-knuckled hands. Don't touch it. Please, don't touch it. Then take it off, Torque yelled. I can't, her voice cracked. I promised. I promised him I wouldn't. Promised who? Torque grabbed the shoulder of the jacket and yanked. The old leather held, but the lining inside tore with the ripping sound that echoed through the silent diner. Ren kicked out. Her sneaker connected with Torque's shin. It wasn't hard, barely enough to make him stumble, but it was enough to shock him. She kicked me, Torque said. His voice dropped. The playfulness, the performance, all of it was gone. Now it was just ego and wounded pride in front of his brothers. You little piece of the other bikers were on their feet. The atmosphere shifted. The pack instinct had activated. This was no longer hazing. This was discipline. Even Briggs stood up, wiping his mouth with a napkin. All right, Briggs said, walking over. His boots thudded on the linoleum like hammer blows. Torque, back off. You're making a scene over nothing. She kicked a patched member needle. Briggs looked at Ren. He wasn't angry. He was tired and imposing and something else. Something that might have been sad. Look, kid, you're in a bad spot. I get it. You wandered in here wearing something that means a lot to these men. It insults the men who died in jackets like that. Just hand it over. We'll dispose of it. You walk out. Nobody gets hurt. I'm not playing dress up, Ren said. Tears were running down her face now, but her hands hadn't loosened on the leather. The table was shaking from her trembling. My dad, he told me to wear it. He said if I was ever in trouble, if I needed help. Your dad's a liar, Torque spat. Give it here. He lunged. He grabbed the shoulder of the jacket and wrenched her forward. Ren was light, and she slid across the vinyl bench easily. As she came forward, the back of the jacket, which had been folded and compressed against the booth seat, pulled taut. The overhead fluorescent light hit the back panel for the first time. Wait. The word came from Briggs. It wasn't loud. It was barely above a whisper. But it cut through the room with the force of a blade because of what was behind it. Not authority. Shock. Absolute bone-deep shock. Torque let go. Now, Torque blinked. What I'm just taking I said let go. Briggs roared the words. In the same motion, his hand went to his waistband and came back with a pistol. He didn't point it at the girl. He didn't point it at Torque. He held it at the low ready. His eyes locked onto the back of the jacket, as if he were staring at a ghost that had walked out of the grave and into this grease-stained diner. Torque released her instantly. He stumbled back, hands up. Whoa, Needle. What the hell is going on? Ren scrambled back into the corner, sobbing, pulling the jacket around herself like a shield. Turn around, Briggs whispered. His face had gone white. Every bit of color had drained from his weathered skin. Girl, turn around, let me see the back. I just want to leave, Ren stammered. Nobody is leaving, Briggs said. He looked at the other 11 men. They were confused hands drifting toward their own weapons. Nobody moves. Look at the patch. Look at the bottom rocker. The bikers crowded in, squinting at the old leather in the bad light. The jacket was ancient. The leather was cracked and faded. But the patches were pristine, sewn on with a specific heavy red thread that hadn't been manufactured in 30 years. The center patch was not the wolf skull they all wore. It was a skeleton hand gripping an hourglass, the fingers bony and precise, the sand frozen mid-fall. And the bottom rocker, the curved strip that usually identified a state or territory, did not say Oklahoma or Texas. It said Nomad. First 9, silence. The kind of silence that has weight in mass and presses against your eardrums. In the world of the 1% motorcycle club, lineage is everything. The first 9 are the founders, the originals, the men who built the mythology from nothing, who wrote it into existence and wrote the codes in blood. They are not leaders. They are the Iron Wolves were a young club founded in the 90s. This patch was not an Iron Wolves patch. This was something older. Something sacred. Needle, one of the bikers, whispered. A man named Wicks, wide-eyed and pale. That's not our colors. Why are you losing it over some random patch? Because you're too young, Wicks, Briggs said. His voice was shaking. His gun hand was shaking. The man who had survived 30 years of outlaw life without flinching was trembling in a roadside diner. That's not random. That's the Ashen Saints. Several of the older men gasped. One crossed himself. The Ashen Saints. They weren't just a club. They were a legend so large it had become a myth. They had ruled the West Coast and the Southern Quarter in the 70s and 80s. They were the apex predators, the club that other clubs measured themselves against and fell short. The Iron Wolves existed only because the Ashen Saints had allowed them to. The Saints had saved the Wolves' founder from the Juarez cartel in a border war that left 14 men dead. The debt was foundational. It was the bedrock on which the Iron Wolves had built their entire empire. But the Ashen Saints were gone, destroyed in the federal purge of '89, extinct, or so everyone believed. Briggs took a step closer to Wren. His entire demeanor had transformed. The aggression, the authority, the tired indifference. All of it was gone, replaced by a reverence that looked almost like terror. He pointed a shaking finger at the small rectangular patch on the front of the jacket over the heart. "Girl," Briggs said softly. "What is the name on the front?" Wren looked down. She sniffled, wiping her nose on the enormous sleeve. "It says Gravedigger." The blood drained from Torque's face. Even the young prospect knew that name. Emmett Gravedigger Calloway, the enforcer, the boogeyman, the man who, according to police files and biker folklore, had single-handedly destroyed a rival clubhouse with a sawed-off shotgun and a tire iron to avenge a fallen brother. He was supposed to have died in prison 20 years ago. "Gravedigger is a legend," Torque stammered. "This kid bought this at a pawn shop. It's fake, has to be." Briggs ignored him. He holstered his gun slowly, never taking his eyes off the girl. Then he did something that made every man in the room hold his breath. He knelt down. A 250-pound outlaw biker kneeling on the dirty linoleum floor of a roadside diner so he could be eye level with the shivering 16-year-old girl drowning in dead man's leather. "Wren," Briggs said gently. "You said your name is Wren?" She nodded. "Is Emmett Calloway your father's?" "Yeah." "Where is he, Wren? Where is Emmett?" She hesitated. Her lip trembled. She looked at the door, then back at Briggs. "He's in the truck outside." Briggs froze. He looked toward the dark window, rain streaming down the glass. "In the truck." "He's dead," Wren cried out, and the dam inside her broke. The seal that had held since her mother's funeral cracked open and everything behind it poured out. "He died 2 days ago. He told me to bring his jacket to the Iron Wolves at the state line. He said to find a man named Rowan Thorne. He said Rowan owes him a soul." The air left the room. Rowan Thorne was the national president of the Iron Wolves. He wasn't here. He was at the main compound 50 miles north. But the mention of his name, connected to the gravedigger, confirmed everything. Briggs stood up slowly. He looked at Torque. His face was carved from ice. "Torque," Briggs said, "you just put your hands on the daughter of the man who saved our president's life in '98. Torque looked like he was about to be sick. "I didn't know," he whispered. "Needle, look at her. She looks like a homeless kid. How was I supposed to?" "She is royalty," Briggs roared at the sound, bouncing off the walls and shaking the coffee mugs on the counter. "In this world, in our world, she is royalty. And you just tried to strip her." Briggs turned back to Wren. "You said he's in the truck. His body. His ashes." Wren sobbed. "And his bike is on the trailer. The truck broke down a mile back. I walked here. I didn't know where else to go." Briggs closed his eyes. He stood still for a long moment, the weight of what was happening settling onto his shoulders like a physical thing. Then he opened his eyes and became the vice president again. "Wicks, Haney, get the van, go get the truck and the bike. Bring them here, now. On it, VP." Wicks said, and he was out the door before the sentence was finished. Briggs looked at Dutch. Dutch locked the door, flipped the sign. "Nobody comes in, nobody goes out." Dutch didn't argue. He moved to the door, turned the deadbolt, and flipped the neon sign to dark. Briggs pulled out his phone. "What are we doing?" Needle Torque asked. He was terrified now. The bravado had collapsed completely. "I'm calling Rowan," Briggs said, "and then we're going to pray that he doesn't put us all in the ground for what almost happened here tonight." He dialed. The phone rang once, twice. But before anyone picked up, Wren spoke again. Her voice was small. It came from the corner booth from behind the shield of the giant jacket, and it was quiet enough that you had to lean in to hear it. But the words landed like grenades. My dad said something else. Briggs paused, the phone pressed to his ear. What did he say, sweetheart? He said if I found the Iron Wolves, I had to be careful. Why is that? Because the debt Rowan owes him isn't money. My dad said Rowan promised to protect me from the people who killed my mom. And he said those people, the ones who came for her, they're wearing Iron Wolves patches too. Briggs lowered the phone. He looked at the men around him. 12 faces, 12 sets of eyes. Brothers, all of them. Men he had ridden with, bled with, broken bread with. Men he trusted with his life. One of whom might be a murderer, a traitor, a man who had sold his colors to a cartel and killed a civilian woman in her own home. The tension in the diner became a living thing. It pressed against the walls. It squeezed the air from every lung. Emmett Calloway hadn't just sent his daughter for protection. He had sent her into a den of wolves to flush out the one that was rabid. And the rabid wolf was almost certainly in this room. Briggs put the phone down. He drew his pistol again. Nobody moves, he said. His voice was calm, but the calm of a man standing on the edge of a cliff. Nobody speaks. Nobody reaches for a phone. Rowan is 20 minutes out. Until then, we all sit tight. The minutes crawled. Wren sat in her booth, hands wrapped around a mug of hot chocolate that Dutch had slid across the counter to her. The warmth seeped into her fingers, but it couldn't touch the cold in her chest. She watched the men the way her father had taught her to watch. Not their mouths, their hands, their eyes. Her father had told her stories about the wolf life, about loyalty and honor and the codes men live by. But he had also told her about greed. They're wolves, Wren, he had said, coughing in his motel bed. Wolves are loyal to the pack. But if a wolf gets sick or weak or greedy, the pack eats him. I'm sending you to the alpha. To Rowan. But you have to survive the pack to get to him. Headlights swept across the front windows. Not one pair. 10, then 20. The low rumble of V-twin engines vibrated through the floorboards and rattled the silverware on the tables. It wasn't the random noise of a group of riders. It was synchronized, disciplined, a wall of controlled thunder. He's here, Wick said. He had returned from securing the truck and was standing by the window, pale and wet. Looks like he brought the nomads. The engines cut. All at once, silence flooded back in heavier than before. Briggs unlocked the door and stepped back, his head bowed. The door swung open. Wind and rain gusted in, and with them came Rowan Thorne. He was a mountain. Even at 62, he filled the doorway like a monument. He wore a black duster coat over his cut, both soaking wet. His beard was long and white, braided with small silver beads that clicked when he moved. His face was a topographic map of violence and survival. Scars across his forehead, deep lines around his eyes, and the eyes themselves pale gray, the color of gunmetal, flat and cold and ancient. Behind him, 6 men entered. These were the nomads, Rowan's personal guard. They didn't wear state rockers. They answered to no chapter. They answered only to him. Each one carried a rifle slung beneath his coat. Rowan didn't speak. He stood in the center of the diner and scanned the room with the patience of a man who had learned decades ago that rushing gets people killed. His gaze passed over Torque, who shrank under it, over Briggs, who stood at attention, over Dutch, who nodded once, over Mabel, who was crying silently into her apron. Then his eyes found the corner booth. He walked toward it. Each step was deliberate, heavy, the sound of authority crossing a room. He stopped at the table and looked down at the small, soaking, terrified girl in the enormous leather jacket. He looked at the patch on the chest. Gravedigger. Slowly, Rowan Thorne, president of the Iron Wolves, the man who controlled the illicit trade across 3 states, went down on one knee. He reached out his right hand. It was missing the ring finger lost to a knife fight in 1991. Wren, he said, his voice sounded like a truck engine idling on a cold morning. Yes, let me see him, Rowan said. Wren understood. He wasn't asking to see her father's body, he was asking to see the jacket. The spirit, she turned slightly, showing the back patch. The skeleton hand, the hourglass, the faded first 9 rocker. Rowan closed his eyes. He reached out and touched the leather, his thumb tracing the stitching with the tenderness of a man touching a headstone. A single tear rolled down his cheek and vanished into his beard. Emmett, Rowan whispered, "You stubborn son of a gun." You finally came home. He knelt there for a long moment, lost in a memory that predated everyone else in the room. A memory of two young men on the open road, brothers forged in gunfire and gasoline. Then the moment passed. The grief disappeared behind a wall of cold, controlled fury. Rowan stood. He turned to face the room. Briggs, Rowan said, "President, you called me. You said Emmett's daughter says there's a traitor in my chapter." She did. Rowan walked to the center of the room. He unbuttoned his duster, revealing two pearl-handled revolvers tucked into his belt. "Emmett Calloway was my brother," Rowan said. "Every man in the room was listening. He saved my life in '98. He took a bullet meant for me. He went to prison for 10 years so I could walk free and build this club. I owe him everything. I owe him more than everything." Rowan's eyes swept the room. "If his daughter says there is a rat among us, then there is a rat." Torque dropped to his knees. "President, it wasn't me. I swear, I just made fun of her jacket. I didn't know who she get up," Rowan barked. "I know it wasn't you. You're too stupid to be a traitor. You're just a bully with more mouth than brains." Torque scrambled to his feet, confused but flooded with relief. Rowan turned back to Wren. "Child, what did your father tell you?" "Exactly." Wren took a breath. She reached into the jacket pocket. "He gave me this," she said. She pulled out the Zippo lighter. "He said he took it off the man who came to our house, the man who killed my mother." Every sound in the diner stopped. Even the rain seemed to pause. Rowan took the lighter. He held it up to the flickering fluorescent light. The wolf's head, the dagger, the date, October 12th, 2018. "This is a club lighter," Rowan said. His voice was low and dangerous. "We issue these for 5 years of service, but this engraving, the dagger through the wolf." He looked around the room. "Who lost a lighter?" Silence. I said. Rowan roared, "Who lost a lighter?" Nobody moved. Then Wren spoke. She didn't wait for Rowan to issue the command. She stood up from the booth, still shivering, still dwarfed by the jacket, but something in her posture had changed. The fear was still there, but underneath it was something else. Something inherited. "Everyone check your pockets," Wren said. Her voice was clear. "Right now, hold up your lighters. All of them." The men looked at Rowan. He nodded once. They began patting down their vests and jeans. Lighters appeared. Zippos, cheap plastic Bics, brass trench lighters. They held them out, a strange offering in the diner's pale light. One man didn't check his pockets. He stood near the back of the room by the jukebox. He was large, shaved head with a spider-web tattoo on his neck and a stillness about him that was different from the others' frightened paralysis. His was the stillness of calculation. His name was Kessler. He was the sergeant at arms for Briggs's chapter, the enforcer, the man responsible for club security, the man whose job it was to protect these men from exactly the kind of threat he himself represented. "Kessler," Rowan said, "check your pockets." Kessler smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was not even a cold smile. It was the smile of a man who has been wearing a mask for years and has just decided to take it off. "I don't smoke anymore," Rowan Kessler said. His voice was smooth and calm. "Since when?" Briggs asked, frowning. "I saw you smoking outside an hour ago." "I quit just now," Kessler said. His right hand drifted slowly toward his waistband. "Don't," Rowan warned. The nomads raised their rifles in a single coordinated motion. "You think I'm scared of you, old man?" Kessler dropped the pretense. His voice turned hard and raw. "The Iron Wolves are weak. You're running product for pennies while the cartels are offering millions. We could be kings, but you want to play by codes and honor. Emmett Calloway was a relic. And so are you. You killed her mother," Rowan said. His voice was shaking with a rage that was almost seismic. "Claire Calloway. A civilian. A school teacher. She got in the way." Kessler shrugged. "I was looking for Emmett. The cartel put a price on his head. A big one. I went to collect. I didn't know he had a kid." He looked at Wren. "Thanks, kid. You saved me a trip. Brought him right to me," Kessler Briggs said, stepping forward. "You're a dead man." "Am I?" Kessler pulled a remote detonator from his pocket, a small black device with a toggle switch and a red button. The room froze. "I wired the building while you were all staring at the little girl," Kessler said. "C4 under the floorboards. I knew this day might come. I figured if things went sideways, I'd take the whole leadership with me. The cartel pays my family either way." Live or dead, I get mine. He held his thumb over the button. Nobody moves, Kessler screamed. Back off, all of you. I'm walking out of here. I'm taking the girl's truck and the gravedigger's bike. If anyone follows me, I press this button and we all become a memory. The nomads lowered their rifles slightly, looking to Rowan. Briggs stood paralyzed. He couldn't shoot. If Kessler's thumb twitched, they were all dead. Kessler began backing toward the kitchen door. Nice and easy, nobody be a hero, he looked at Wren. Sorry about your old man, kid. Business is business. He was grinning. He had won. He had outsmarted Rowan Thorne. He had outsmarted 12 armed men and a dead legend's ghost. But he had forgotten about the girl. Wren Calloway stood up from the booth. Sit down, Kessler shouted. No. She wasn't crying anymore. The tears had dried. The trembling had stopped. Something had shifted inside her, some final gear clicking into place. She looked at Kessler the way her father must have looked at men before he earned his name, without flinching. My dad told me about men like you, she said. Her voice was steady and clear, and it filled the diner. Shut up, Kessler yelled. He said you build everything on fear. You think because people are afraid of you, you're powerful. But fear isn't power. Fear is just noise. Sit down or I blow this whole building to hell, Kessler shrieked. No, you won't, Wren said. She stepped out from behind the table. A 16-year-old girl drowning in a dead man's jacket walking toward a killer holding a bomb. You won't press that button because you're greedy. You said it yourself. The cartel pays either way. But dead men don't spend money, and you want to spend it. You want the bike. You want the payout. You want to live. Kessler hesitated. His thumb hovered over the button. Sweat was running down his face. She was right, and they both knew it. In that fraction of a second, that hairline crack in his resolve, Wren did something that no one in the room expected. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a key. A motorcycle key. Her father's shovelhead key. You want the bike, she asked, holding it up. The gravedigger's bike. The one that's worth a fortune to collectors and even more to the cartel as a trophy. Kessler's eyes went to the key. Greed flared behind them. That bike was legendary. Toss it here, Kessler commanded. Wren threw it, but not to him. She threw it high toward the spinning ceiling fan in the center of the room. The key arced through the air, glinting under the fluorescent light. Instinct, greed, reflex. For one fraction of 1 second, Kessler's eyes followed the key. He looked up. The blast was deafening in the small space. It didn't come from Rowan. It didn't come from Briggs. It didn't come from any of the armed men who had trained for exactly this kind of moment. It came from Dutch. The diner owner, the man everyone had ignored, the man who was just part of the furniture, had pulled a sawed-off shotgun from beneath the counter. He had been holding it there the entire time, waiting for the right moment, waiting for a window. Wren gave him one. The blast caught Kessler in the chest and threw him backward through the swinging kitchen doors. The detonator flew from his hands, spinning across the linoleum. Briggs dove for it, sliding on the floor, covering it with his body. He braced for the explosion. It never came. Briggs rolled over, breathing hard. Wren knelt beside him and picked up the motorcycle key from where it had landed under the center table. She closed her fist around it and slipped it into the jacket pocket without a word. Silence returned. The ringing kind. The kind that sounds like the world is holding its breath. Dutch racked the shotgun, ejecting the spent shell. It clattered on the floor. No fighting in my diner. He grunted. That's the only rule. Rowan stared at Dutch. Then he looked at Wren, who was standing in the middle of the room, chest heaving alive. He walked over to Dutch. He nodded once. Send me the bill for the door. Then he turned to Wren. He placed both hands on her shoulders. The weight of them was enormous and steady. You have your father's eyes, Rowan said, and his guts. He looked at the key on the floor, then at his men. Clean this up, Rowan ordered. Get the body out. Check under every floorboard. And someone get this girl some iguana dry to wear. He looked down at Wren. You're safe now, child. You're with the wolves, and God help anyone who tries to touch you again. But the adrenaline had been the only thing keeping her upright. As it drained away, the world tilted. The exhaustion, the grief, the 2 days without sleep, the mile in the rain, the terror. All of it crashed into her at once like a wave breaking on shore. Her eyes rolled back, her knees buckled. Briggs caught her before she hit the floor. He held her in his arms, and she was so small, so impossibly small inside that massive jacket that he felt something crack behind his ribs that he hadn't felt in 20 years. I got her, Briggs said quietly. Rowan looked at him, then at the girl, then at the door beyond which the storm still raged. Bring her, Rowan said. We're going to the compound. The gravedigger is coming home. And they walked out into the rain. 12 men and a dead legend's daughter. The storm was still howling, but Wren Calloway didn't feel it. She was already somewhere else, somewhere deep and black and silent, where fathers don't die and mothers don't get taken away, and the world makes the kind of sense it never makes when you're awake. She would wake up in a different world, a world of wolves and codes and chrome and the long open road, a world her father had spent his whole life trying to protect her from, and his last breath sending her toward. But that is a story for another chapter. Wren Calloway did not dream. She fell into a blackness so complete it had no edges, no floor, no ceiling. It was the kind of sleep that the body demands when the mind has been pushed past every boundary it has. Not rest, erasure. A temporary death that the living sometimes need in order to keep living. When she opened her eyes, the world had changed. The ceiling above her was made of wood. Real wood, dark-stained pine planks, fitted together with the care of someone who understood that the way you build a thing says something about who you are. Sunlight came through a window to her left, heavy and golden, the kind of November light that arrives late in the morning and carries no warmth. Dust motes drifted through the beams like tiny planets in orbit. She was lying in a real bed, with clean white sheets and a thick wool blanket that smelled of cedar and laundry soap. The room was small and simple. Wood-paneled walls, a dresser with a mirror, a braided rug on the floor, a rocking chair in the corner. In the rocking chair sat a woman. She was in her 50s with dark hair streaked silver at the temples and pulled back in a loose braid. Her face was lined but gentle, the kind of face that has absorbed a great deal of hard living and converted it into patience. She was knitting something small, a scarf or a dishcloth, and her needles clicked in a steady rhythm that was almost hypnotic. Easy, honey, the woman said, setting down her work. You're safe. You've been out for 14 hours. Wren sat up too fast. The room tilted. Her hands went immediately to her body, patting herself, searching. My clothes, my jacket. Your clothes are in the wash, the woman said. She stood and crossed to the bed, moving with the calm authority of someone who had spent decades managing chaos. I'm Lorraine. Briggs is my husband. You're at the compound, the main clubhouse. Where is my jacket? Lorraine's expression shifted. Something crossed her face that Wren had never seen directed at her before. It wasn't pity. It wasn't sympathy. It was reverence. Your jacket is in the chapel, Lorraine said. Rowan is looking after it personally. The chapel, the meeting room, Lorraine explained. The place where club business happens. Nobody goes in without the president's permission. Your father's jacket is being treated like a flag. Come on. You need to eat, and Rowan wants to see you. Lorraine led her out of the room and into a hallway that felt more like a hunting lodge than anything Wren had imagined a criminal headquarters would look like. The walls were lined with photographs, black and white, mostly, some faded to sepia. Men on motorcycles, men standing in front of garages and bars and open desert highways. Young faces, hard faces, faces full of the kind of reckless certainty that belongs exclusively to men who believe they will live forever. Wren stopped at one photograph. It was larger than the others, framed in dark wood. Two young men, barely out of their 20s, stood with their arms around each other's shoulders. They were laughing. Each held a beer bottle raised in a toast. Behind them, a row of motorcycles stretched into the distance like a chrome horizon. One of the men was a young Rowan Thorne. Leaner than dark-haired, with a wildness in his eyes that age had compressed into something denser and more dangerous. The other man had a grin that could light a room on fire. His eyes were pale blue, full of a joy that seemed almost violent in its intensity. He wore a leather jacket with the sleeves cut off, and even in the grainy photograph you could see the muscles in his forearms and the confidence in his stance. He looked like a man who was afraid of absolutely nothing. Wren touched the glass with her fingertips. They were kings, Lorraine said softly from behind her. Rowan and Emmett. They ran this part of the country before the corporations and the federal task forces moved in. Your father was the only man Rowan ever truly feared, and the only man he ever truly loved, like a brother. Wren pulled her hand away from the glass. She didn't speak. She followed Lorraine down a flight of stairs and into the main common room. It was enormous. A bar ran along one wall, fully stocked with a brass rail and leather-topped stools. Pool tables occupied the center. Leather couches and armchairs were scattered in clusters. A massive iron wolf skull, forged from welded scrap metal, hung above a stone fireplace large enough to stand in. The room smelled of coffee and leather and old smoke. And it was full of people. Bikers, prospects, their wives and girlfriends, even a few children running between the tables. The noise of conversation and clinking glasses and a television playing somewhere in the background filled the space with the hum of ordinary life. All of it stopped when Wren appeared at the bottom of the stairs. The silence started at the tables nearest to her and spread outward like a ripple in a pond. Conversations died mid-sentence. Pool cues were lowered. Glasses were set down. Every face in the room turned toward the staircase, and the small figure standing on the last step wearing an oversized t-shirt that wasn't hers and looking like she might bolt at any moment. Then the men began to stand, one by one pushing back their chairs, rising to their feet. They didn't salute, they didn't speak. They simply stood, and some of them touched their chests over their hearts, and the room was so quiet you could hear the logs settling in the fireplace. These were men who had killed for their club, men who had done prison time and bled on highways and buried brothers in unmarked graves. And they were standing in silence for a 16-year-old girl in a borrowed shirt because of whose blood ran in her veins. Wren. The voice came from the far end of the room, deep and rough like boulders grinding together underground. Rowan Thorne stood at the head of a long mahogany table. He looked like he hadn't slept. His eyes were red-rimmed and his white beard was uncombed, but the authority radiating from him was unchanged. Beside him sat Briggs, equally exhausted, a cup of coffee untouched in front of him. "Come here, child," Rowan said. Wren crossed the room. The standing men parted for her without a word. She reached the table. In the center, resting on a dark velvet cloth like a religious artifact in a museum, was her father's jacket. It had been transformed. The grease and road grime had been cleaned away. The leather gleamed with fresh oil, rich and dark. The rips in the lining where Torque had grabbed it had been stitched back together with gold thread, the repairs visible and deliberate, turning the damage into decoration, highlighting the wounds rather than hiding them. "We need to talk about the jacket," Rowan said. He gestured for her to sit. "It's all I have left of him," Wren said. Her hand hovered over the leather, but she didn't touch it. "It's more than that," Rowan said. He reached into his own vest and pulled out a hunting knife with a bone handle. He flipped the jacket over, exposing the interior. Along the lower back panel, built into the leather, was a thick, padded section designed to support the kidneys on long rides. Standard on old touring jackets. Functional. Unremarkable. When we cleaned it, Rowan said, I felt something. I thought it was just padding at first, but it was too hard, too rigid. With the precision of a man who understood the value of what he was cutting, Rowan sliced a single thread on the inside seam. He reached in with two thick fingers and pulled out a small black notebook. It was wrapped in plastic wrap and sealed with duct tape. The tape was old yellowed and it peeled away with a dry, crackling sound. Wren stared. "He was writing in that," she said, "the night he died. He told me it was his will." "It is a will," Briggs said, his face grim, "but not the kind lawyers read." Rowan opened the notebook. The pages were filled with dense handwriting, small and precise. The penmanship of a man who understood that details save lives and carelessness ends them. Dates, coordinates, names, license plate numbers, bank routing numbers, account balances, maps drawn with the accuracy of a military cartographer, routes marked with times and frequencies. "Your father wasn't just hiding," Rowan said. He looked at her with something that went beyond respect. It was closer to awe. He was hunting. For 10 years, he's been tracking the Sinaloa cartel's movements across the Midwest. He has the locations of their stash houses. He has the schedules of their shipments. He has the license plates of every vehicle they use for drops between Amarillo and Tulsa. Rowan turned a page. "And he has the names," Rowan whispered. "Judges, sheriffs, highway patrol captains, county commissioners. The people who are supposed to protect this state and who have been selling it to the cartels for cash in envelopes." The room felt colder. Wren looked at the notebook. The handwriting was her father's, and seeing it felt like hearing his voice again, quiet and precise, speaking from beyond the grave. That's why Kessler wanted to kill him, Wren said. It wasn't just a hit. It was an extermination, Rowan said. They knew Emmett had the book. They knew he was building something that could burn their entire operation to the ground. Kessler was their inside man. He was supposed to find Emmett, take the book, and make it disappear. Rowan closed the notebook. He placed his heavy hand on top of it and looked at Wren with an expression that held no pretense, no manipulation, no agenda. Just the truth. Wren, this book is a bomb. If we hand it to the FBI, half the local power structure goes to prison. Judges, cops, politicians. But if the wrong people learn we have it, they will bring an army to these gates. The cartel doesn't negotiate with people who can destroy them. They eliminate them. He pushed the notebook toward her. Your father left this to you. Technically, it's your property. I can burn it right now, tonight. The heat dies down, we go back to our business, and you live a quiet life somewhere with a new name. Nobody comes looking. Nobody gets hurt. He paused. Or we use it, Rowan said. We finish what Emmett started. But if we do that, we are at war. Real war, not a bar fight, not a territory dispute. War with a cartel that has more money, more guns, and more soldiers than we will ever have. The silence in the room was absolute. Every man who had been standing was still standing. Every eye was on Wren. She looked at the notebook. She thought about her father in that motel room, coughing blood, barely able to lift his hand but still writing, still fighting. She thought about her mother Claire, who had been a school teacher and who had once told Renan that the bravest thing a person can do is stand up for someone who can't stand up for themselves. She thought about Kessler shrugging, saying Claire got in the way as if her mother's life were a minor inconvenience. Wren stood up. She picked up the leather jacket and put it on. It was still too big. The shoulders still hung wide. The sleeves still swallowed her hands. But she rolled back the shoulders and stood straight, and in that moment, drowning in leather, in legacy, she looked like something forged rather than born. My dad didn't run, she said. Her voice trembled, but the words were iron. And I'm not running either. Burn them down. Rowan looked at her for a long time. Then he smiled, and it was a terrifying smile, the smile of a wolf that has just caught a scent. Briggs, Rowan said, call the chapters, call the support clubs, call everyone we've ever ridden with. We're going to have a funeral for Emmett. Briggs picked up his phone. What kind of funeral, Press? The kind that makes the ground shake. The days that followed were the hardest of Wren's life and the most clarifying. Rowan gave her a choice. She could stay in the guest room and be protected, a ward of the club. Safe, passive, shielded from the world that had killed both her parents. Or she could earn her place. She chose to earn it. They gave her a prospect vest. It was plain denim, no patches except a single bottom rocker that said prospect. In the hierarchy of the motorcycle club, a prospect was the lowest form of life. Lower than the hang-arounds who drank at the bar. Lower than the women who cleaned the kitchen. A prospect swept the floors. A prospect washed the bikes. A prospect carried tools and fetched coffee and stood in the rain at 4 a.m, guarding the gate if told to. A prospect did not speak at the table. A prospect did not vote. A prospect did not complain. Wren did all of it without a word. She woke at 5 every morning. She scrubbed the common room floor on her hands and knees. She cleaned and polished every motorcycle in the compound, learning the difference between a panhead and a shovel head, between a Springer fork and a telescopic, between the sound a healthy engine makes and the sound it makes when something is dying inside it. She carried cases of beer from the delivery truck. She emptied ashtrays and mopped bathrooms and stood post at the front gate in the cold November wind with nothing but her prospect vest and a thermos of coffee. The men watched her, some with respect, some with curiosity, some with suspicion, a few with hostility. She was a child, a girl in a world built by and for hard men. She had not ridden a mile. She had not bled for the club. She had a famous last name and a dead father, and to some of them, that was enough, and to others, it was nothing. Wren didn't care what they thought. She cared about the notebook. Every night after the compound quieted down and the bar emptied, and the last stragglers stumbled to their bunks, Wren sat at the small desk in her room with the black notebook open in front of her. She read it the way a scholar reads a sacred text, slowly, carefully cross-referencing entries, building a map in her mind of the system her father had spent a decade documenting. and she found what Rowan had missed. It started with the dates. Her father had recorded the dates of every cartel shipment that passed through Oklahoma over a 10-year period. He had also recorded the dates of every law enforcement action taken against the Iron Wolves during that same period. Raids, traffic stops, warrant searches, asset seizures. Wren laid the two sets of dates side by side. The pattern was unmistakable. Every major cartel shipment was preceded within 48 hours by a law enforcement action against the Iron Wolves. Every single time. When the cartel moved 100 kilos through Tulsa, the county sheriff raided an Iron Wolves safe house 2 days before. When the cartel ran a cash shipment through Elk City, a state trooper pulled over a Wolves convoy for a minor traffic violation that escalated into a drug search. It was a system. The law enforcement raids weren't random. They were coordinated distractions. Someone was using the Iron Wolves as a decoy, drawing police attention and resources away from the cartel's actual routes. But there was something else, something deeper. On page 47, her father had recorded a bank account number. It appeared 6 times across 3 years, each time receiving a deposit within 72 hours of an Iron Wolves raid. The deposits ranged from $10,000 to $50,000. Next to the account number, Emmett had written a single notation, a question mark. He hadn't been able to identify the owner. Wren stared at that question mark. Her father, who had tracked the cartel across 5 states, who had identified corrupt judges and bought off sheriffs, had been unable to connect this account to a name. But Emmett hadn't had access to what Wren had. He hadn't been inside the clubhouse. He hadn't seen the club's internal records. Wren went to Briggs. "I need to see the club ledger," she said. "The dates of every raid, every time we got hit." "Why?" Briggs asked, frowning. "Because my father found something he couldn't finish." "I think I can finish it." Briggs hesitated. Club records were sacred. Opening them to a prospect, even a prospect with the gravedigger's blood-violated protocol. But something in Wren's eyes, the same pale blue intensity that had once burned in her father's, made him go to Rowan. Rowan authorized it. "Give her what she needs," he said. "Emmett trusted her enough to send her to us carrying a nuclear bomb. I trust her enough to let her read the instruction manual." Wren spent 2 nights cross-referencing. She matched the dates of every Iron Wolves raid to the club's internal schedule, the roster of which members were present at each event, who was on the road, who was at the compound, who had access to the details of upcoming club movements. One name appeared every time, present at every planning meeting that preceded a raid, absent during the raid itself, back at the compound within hours as if nothing had happened. Dawes. Marcus Dawes, 51 years old, full patch member for 11 years, quiet, reliable, unremarkable. He ran the club's legitimate front businesses, a chain of auto repair shops across 3 counties. He attended church on Sundays. He had a wife and 2 grown sons. He was by every visible measure the most boring and trustworthy man in the Iron Wolves. He was also, Wren was now certain, the second traitor. She brought her findings to Rowan and Briggs at 3 in the morning in the chapel. She laid the notebook open on the table beside the club ledger. She showed them the dates. She showed them the pattern. She showed them the bank account. Dawes. Briggs said, his face going gray. "He's been with us 11 years. He was at my wedding. Kessler was the gun," Wren said. "Dawes is the brain. Kessler did the cartel's dirty work, but someone had to tell the cartel when and where to move. Someone had to coordinate the raids that gave the cartel cover. That someone had access to our schedule, and that someone is Dawes." Rowan's hands were flat on the table. His knuckles were white. "I want him dead by morning," Rowan said. "No." The word came from Wren. It landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. Rowan looked at her. His eyes narrowed. "No. If you kill Dawes now, the cartel knows we've found their second man. They'll change their routes, move their stash houses, burn their connections. Everything in this notebook becomes worthless. But if we leave Dawes in place, if we let him keep reporting, we control what the cartel sees. We feed Dawes the information we want the cartel to have, and we use the funeral to make our first move." Briggs stared at her. "She's 16, he said, not to anyone in particular. Just into the air, as if he needed to remind himself. Rowan was silent for a long time. He stared at the notebook, then at Wren, then at the wall where the photograph of him and Emmett hung. "You sound like your father," Rowan said. He always said the best weapon isn't a gun, it's patience, he nodded slowly. Dawes stays, Rowan said. For now. But I want eyes on him every second. The moment the funeral is over, we end him. Agreed, Wren said. Rowan looked at Briggs. And Briggs makes sure she's at the table when we plan the funeral route. She's earned the seat. The funeral preparations consumed the compound for the next 72 hours. Word had gone out across the biker telegraph, that ancient network of phone calls and bar conversations and whispered messages that spread through the outlaw world faster than any digital signal. The gravedigger was dead. His ashes were with the Iron Wolves, and Rowan Thorne was calling in every debt, every favor, every alliance his club had ever built. They came from across the country. The Grim Reapers from Kansas City, 40 strong, their cuts dusty from the road. The Devil's Disciples from Amarillo, 25 riders on blacked-out Harleys. The Outlaws of Wichita. The Ironside Brotherhood from Denver. Old clubs, hardened clubs that had fought each other for decades, but who all shared one common thread. Respect for the Ashen Saints, and by extension, respect for the gravedigger. 400 motorcycles gathered at the compound. The parking lot became a sea of chrome and black leather. The air thrummed with the idle of V-twin engines and the smell of high-octane fuel. In the chapel the night before the funeral, Wren sat at the long table with Rowan Briggs and the chapter presidents of every allied club. She was the youngest person in the room by 30 years. She was also the one who laid out the plan. The route will pass through Harlan County, Wren said. She had a map spread on the table marked with her father's neat handwriting. The sheriff there is named Harlan Croft. His name is on page 14 of my father's notebook. He took $50,000 from the cartel to look the other way when shipments moved through his jurisdiction. She tapped the map. We'll meet him at the county line. 400 bikes, a hearse, and a photocopy of the page with his signature on it. What do you want from him? One of the visiting presidents asked. A leather-skinned man from Kansas City with hands like engine blocks. An escort, Wren said. Lights and sirens, every intersection blocked. The gravedigger gets a procession fit for a head of state. And if Croft doesn't cooperate, we email the entire notebook to the FBI, the DEA, and every newspaper in the state. What does that accomplish? The Kansas City president asked. Beyond humiliation, it accomplishes two things, Wren said. First, it proves to the cartel that we have the book and we're willing to use it. That buys us time. They'll negotiate before they attack. Second, it forces Croft into a public act of submission. Once he escorts us with lights and sirens, he can't deny his involvement. He's compromised. He becomes our asset whether he likes it or not. Rowan leaned back in his chair. He looked at the other presidents. The old men looked at the young girl. The room was quiet for a long time. The Kansas City president spoke first. Emmett raised a sharp one. She's not raised, Rowan said. She's forged. The morning broke over the Oklahoma plains in bruised purples and bleeding oranges, the kind of sky that looked like the world had been in a fight and lost. The air was cold and still holding its breath. The noise came first. Before you could see them, you could feel them. 400 motorcycles idling in formation sent a vibration through the ground that you felt in your chest, in your teeth, in the marrow of your bones. It was not the random roar of traffic. It was organized, deliberate, a controlled detonation of sound that announced to the world that something consequential was about to move. In the center of the formation sat a black 1969 Cadillac hearse borrowed from a funeral home in Tulsa, whose owner owed the Iron Wolves a favor. In the back, resting on a bed of black velvet, was a simple pine box holding Emmett Calloway's ashes. On top of the box sat a folded American flag, because Emmett had always believed that the country he loved and the country that had failed him were the same country, and he had never stopped claiming it as his own. Wren stood at the front of the formation beside the lead bike. Her father's 1978 shovelhead restored to impossible perfection by the club mechanics working through 3 sleepless nights. The chrome caught the dawn light and threw it back in blinding flashes. The black paint was deep as a lake at midnight. She wasn't riding it. She didn't know how. Briggs would ride it carrying the gravedigger's colors on the riderless horse, the empty bike that led the procession like a soldier's horse with boots reversed in the stirrups. You ride with me, Rowan said. He was mounted on his massive custom touring bike, a black and chrome monument to 40 years on the road. He patted the seat behind him. Wren climbed on. She was wearing the jacket. She wore a helmet that Lorraine had painted matte black for her overnight, unadorned, except for a single thin gold stripe down the center. "Hold on tight," Rowan said over the rumble of 400 engines. "And when we meet the sheriff, don't speak. Just look at him. Let him see your eyes." At the gate of the compound, 3 police cruisers were waiting. Their light bars were dark. Their engines were running. They were positioned across the road in a loose blockade. Leaning against the lead cruiser was Sheriff Harlan Croft. He was a thick-necked man in his 50s, ruddy-faced with aviator sunglasses and a chew of tobacco visible in his lower lip. His name was on page 14. $50,000. 3 separate payments. His signature on a routing slip. He had been warned. Dawes, still functioning as the cartel's eyes inside the club, had told Dawes's handler, and the handler had told Croft to expect trouble. But nobody had told Croft to expect 400 motorcycles. Rowan rolled his bike forward until his front tire was inches from the cruiser's bumper. He killed the engine. 400 engines behind him died in the same instant. The silence was sudden, absolute, and more threatening than any amount of noise. "Morning, Sheriff," Rowan said. Croft chewed. He looked at the bikes. He looked at the hearse. He looked at the girl on the back of Rowan's bike. "That's a lot of bikes, Thorne. You got a parade permit." "Funeral procession," Rowan said. "Emmett Calloway." Croft's jaw stopped moving. Behind his sunglasses, something shifted. "Calloway, the fugitive. I should impound that hearse as evidence." "You could try," Rowan said. He didn't reach for a gun. He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a single sheet of paper folded once. He held it out. Croft took the paper. He unfolded it. His eyes moved across the page. His gum chewing stopped. His face went the color of curdled milk. It was a photocopy of a bank transfer receipt. His signature, his account number, dated 3 years prior. "We found his diary," Sheriff Rowan said. His voice was loud enough that every deputy behind Croft could hear it. "Interesting reading. Lots of names, judges, deputies, cartel lieutenants. Makes for a real page-turner." Croft looked up. Sweat was forming on his forehead despite the November chill. His hand crumpled the paper. "What do you want?" Croft whispered. Wren spoke. She didn't plan to. Rowan had told her to stay silent. But the words came out of her before she could stop them, and they came out in a voice that didn't sound like a 16-year-old girl. It sounded like her father. "We want an escort," Wren said. "Lights and sirens. Every intersection blocked from here to the cemetery. My father is going to have a ride fit for the man he was, and you are going to provide it." Croft stared at her. He looked at Rowan. He looked at the 400 bikers stretched out behind them, a river of chrome and leather and barely contained violence. He turned to his deputies. "Light it up," Croft said. His voice was hollow. "We're escorting the procession." The deputies looked confused, but they obeyed. Blue and red lights flashed to life across 3 cruisers. Sirens wailed, then settled into a low, steady pulse. "Let's ride," Rowan called out. His voice carried across the formation like thunder. 400 engines roared to life. The birds in the trees took flight. The ground shook. Dogs barked in farmhouses a mile away. The procession was 5 miles long. It filled the highway from shoulder to shoulder. At the front, the 3 police cruisers cleared the road, their lights flashing their sirens, announcing the passage of something that transcended their authority. Behind them, Briggs rode the empty shovelhead Emmett's colors visible on his back, the gravedigger's jacket draped across the handlebars like a banner. People stopped to watch. They lined the overpasses and the roadside turnouts and the parking lots of gas stations. They didn't know the politics. They didn't know about the drugs or the murders or the corruption or the notebook. They just saw the spectacle, the raw, undeniable power of the pack. Wren held on to Rowan's waist. The wind cut across her face. The vibration of the engine traveled through her body and settled somewhere deep in her chest, in a place she hadn't known existed. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel small. She didn't feel hunted. She was part of something larger than herself, larger than grief, larger than fear, something unstoppable. They reached the cemetery at mid-morning. It was a private plot of land owned by the club, 10 acres on a hill overlooking the Canadian River. The grass was brown with autumn. The wind whipped across the open ground in cold gusts that snapped at jacket collars and stung exposed skin. 400 bikes parked in rows, a grid of chrome and black that covered the hillside. The men dismounted in silence. No one spoke. No one needed to. Briggs carried the pine box to the open grave. Two prospects had dug it the night before 6 feet deep in the red Oklahoma clay. A simple granite headstone had been placed at the head. It read, Emmett Gravedigger Calloway. First 9. Ashen Saints. Nomad. And below that a single line. He kept his word. Rowan stood at the head of the grave. The wind pulled at his white beard and his duster coat. He did not read from a Bible. He did not hold notes. He spoke from a place that had been filling with words for 25 years. Emmett Calloway was a hard man, Rowan told the crowd. He lived hard. He rode hard. He died hard. He was not a saint. He would have laughed at anyone who called him one. But he was a brother. And in this world, a brother is worth more than a saint. Because a saint will pray for you. A brother will bleed for you. Rowan looked out at the 400 men. In 1998, Emmett Calloway took a bullet that was meant for me. He didn't hesitate. He didn't ask what was in it for him. He stepped in front of the gun because that's what brothers do. And then he went to prison for 7 years so that I could stand here today. So that this club could exist. So that every man wearing these colors could call himself a wolf. Rowan looked at Wren. Step forward, girl. Wren walked to the edge of the grave. The wind pulled at the oversized jacket. She held the notebook in one hand. This is his legacy, Rowan said. Not the miles he rode, not the men he fought. This, his child, standing here, unbroken. Wren looked at the grave. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the Zippo lighter. The one Kessler had carried. The one her father had taken from the man who killed her mother. The wolf's head with the dagger through it. Ashes to ashes, Wren whispered. She flicked the lighter. The flame caught and held dancing sideways in the wind, but refusing to die. She looked at it for a moment. Then she tossed it into the hole onto the pine box. It lay there burning a small, defiant light in the dark earth. Dust to dust, 400 voices rumbled in unison. The sound rolled across the hillside like distant thunder and faded into the wind. The prospects began shoveling the red clay into the grave. Each shovelful landed with a heavy final sound. Wren watched until the box disappeared, until the flame was swallowed by the earth, until there was nothing left but a mound of fresh dirt and a headstone in the wind. She felt a hand on her shoulder. Briggs, you did good, kid, he said quietly. He'd be proud. What happens now? Wren asked. She looked at the sea of bikers, the chrome, the leather, the faces of men she didn't know, but who had ridden hundreds of miles for a man they had never met because the code demanded it. I have nowhere to go. My house is gone. My parents are gone. I don't have anything. Rowan walked over. He took off his sunglasses. His eyes were red but steady. You're a nomad's daughter, Rowan said. The road is your home. And this, he swept his hand across the crowd. This is your family now. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a leather vest. It was small, brand new, cut to fit a narrow frame. On the back, there was no center patch. That had to be earned, and not by blood or name, but by miles and sweat and the slow accumulation of trust. But on the front over the heart was a patch that said, property of no one. And below it the word prospect. You want in, Rowan asked? It's a hard life. No favors. You start at the bottom, you clean the bikes, you sweep the floors, you learn the code, and if someone gives you an order, you follow it, even if it's stupid, especially if it's stupid. Wren took the vest. She held it in both hands. She looked at it, then at the road stretching out toward the horizon, flat and endless, and leading to every direction at once. She put it on and over the jacket. I'm not afraid of work, she said. Good, Rowan said, because you've got a lifetime of it ahead of you. He clapped a hand on her shoulder. Saddle up, prospect. We're going home. 400 engines started as one. The sound filled the valley and echoed off the hills and climbed into the sky. The procession turned and rolled out of the cemetery, a river of steel and leather flowing back toward the highway. In the center of the formation, riding behind Rowan, wearing a prospect vest over her father's jacket, Wren Calloway left the grave behind. She pressed her face against Rowan's back and closed her eyes. The wind smelled of diesel and wet grass and the faintest trace of leather oil from the jacket beneath her vest. Somewhere under all of it, if she concentrated hard enough, she thought she could still smell her father. Tobacco and engine grease and the cheap motel soap he used because he said the expensive stuff was for men who had something to prove. She didn't have anything to prove. Not anymore. She just had work to do. There was nothing behind her that she needed anymore. Everything that mattered was ahead. 1 year later, November 2024, the rain was falling again. It came down in heavy gray sheets, the same relentless Oklahoma rain that had soaked the world the night everything changed. It hammered the tin roof of Dutch's roadside and ran in rivers off the gutters and pooled in the gravel parking lot where a single motorcycle stood under the corrugated metal awning. A 1978 Harley-Davidson shovelhead, black and chrome, its engine ticking with residual heat. The neon sign buzzed and flickered against the storm. The coffee cup with the steam rising from it cast a pink and blue glow across the wet asphalt. Inside, the diner was warm. The same smell of frying bacon and burnt coffee and old grease that had lived in those walls for 30 years. The jukebox in the corner was playing something low and country. The grill was sizzling. The world from the outside looked exactly as it had 12 months ago. But nothing was the same. Mabel was still behind the counter. She moved differently now. The nervous fidgeting was gone. Her hands were steady. She poured coffee and took orders and wiped down tables with the calm efficiency of a woman who no longer lived in fear. On her apron, she wore a small silver pin in the shape of a wolf skull. It was not jewelry. It was a message. Anyone who understood the language of the road knew what it meant. This woman is protected. This place is protected. 'Cause trouble here, and you will answer for it. Dutch was in the kitchen. He had hired a cook 6 months ago, a quiet man named Poole who had done 12 years in McAllister for armed robbery and now made the best chicken fried steak in the county. Dutch still ran the register. He still kept the sawed-off shotgun under the counter. Some habits are load-bearing walls. You don't remove them just because the house looks stable. At the corner booth, the same booth where a terrified girl had once huddled against the wall, while a man twice her size tried to tear the jacket off her back, sat a figure. But this figure was not hiding. This figure was not shivering. This figure was not drowning in someone else's leather. Wren Calloway sat with her back to the wall, one leg propped up on the bench, a half-eaten burger on the plate in front of her, and a glass of sweet tea sweating rings onto the tabletop. She was 17 now. Her blonde hair was cut shorter, just above the shoulders, and there was a leanness to her face that hadn't been there a year ago. The softness of childhood had been burned away by 12 months of road and weather, and the kind of education you cannot get in any classroom. Her hands had changed. They were harder, calloused across the palms from wrench work and handlebar grips. Her knuckles had a roughness to them that came from learning the hard way how to throw a proper punch during a dispute at a roadhouse in Wichita, where a man had made the mistake of thinking she was someone's girlfriend rather than someone's sister-in-arms. She was not wearing her father's jacket. The massive ancient leather of the gravedigger was stored in the chapel at the compound, preserved and honored, brought out only for formal occasions. In its place, Wren wore a fitted denim vest over a black thermal hoodie. The vest was clean, but not new. It had accumulated its own history over 12 months. A grease stain on the left pocket from changing an oil filter on Briggs's Road King at 2 in the morning. A small tear near the hem from catching it on a fence post during a midnight supply run in Amarillo. The marks of a life being lived at high speed on unforgiving roads. On the front of the vest over her heart, the prospect patch was gone. In its place was a white rectangular patch, clean and bright, against the denim that read member. She had earned it 3 weeks ago at a ceremony in the chapel that she would never talk about and that the men who witnessed it would never forget. She had started at the bottom. She had swept the floors and cleaned the bikes and stood post in the rain and carried out every order, stupid or otherwise, without complaint. She had ridden 20,000 miles in 12 months. She had learned to handle the shovelhead, a machine that weighed 600 pounds, and had a Kickstarter that could break your ankle if you got lazy. She had earned every stitch of that patch, and no one in the Iron Wolves, not even the old-timers who had grumbled about a girl wearing colors, could say otherwise. She had also, in ways that most of the club would never know, saved them all. The information she had extracted from her father's notebook, the pattern of coordinated raids, the identification of Dawes as the second traitor, had given Rowan the tools to dismantle the cartel's surveillance network inside the club. Dawes had been fed false information for 3 months, roads that led nowhere. Meeting times that were wrong by hours, shipment details that sent the cartel chasing ghosts across the plains. By the time Rowan finally confronted Dawes in a barn outside of Stillwater, the damage to the cartel's Oklahoma operation was catastrophic. They had lost 4 stash houses, 2 transport vehicles, and the trust of their distribution network, all because a 16-year-old girl had sat up late comparing dates in a dead man's notebook. Dawes was gone now. Nobody talked about how. Nobody asked. In the world of the 1% club, some questions are answered by silence, and silence is an answer you learn to accept. But the cartel had not forgotten, and the cartel did not forgive. Wren took a bite of her burger and looked out the window at the rain. Tuesday night. Taco night at Dutch's, though she always ordered the burger, because Dutch's tacos were a crime against cuisine and nobody had the heart to tell him. She came here every Tuesday. Same booth, same time. It was a ritual, and rituals mattered. This was the place where her old life had ended and her new one had begun, and sitting in this booth every week was her way of honoring the distance between those two versions of herself. The door jingled. Wren didn't look up immediately. She took another bite, chewed slowly, swallowed. Then she raised her eyes. 3 men walked in. They were not bikers. That was obvious from the moment they crossed the threshold. Everything about them was wrong for this room. Their suits were expensive dark charcoal wool tailored to fit bodies that spent time in gyms with personal trainers rather than in garages with socket wrenches. Their shoes were polished to a mirror shine. Their haircuts were precise geometric, the kind of cuts that cost $200 and were maintained on a bi-weekly schedule. They smelled of cologne that probably had a French name and a price tag that could fill a gas tank twice over. They looked like exactly what they were. Lawyers. The kind of lawyers that cartel bosses keep on retainer the way other people keep fire extinguishers. Not for everyday use, for emergencies. They scanned the room with practiced efficiency. Their eyes registered Mabel behind the counter, Dutch visible through the kitchen window, 2 old men at the counter eating pie, and the young woman in the corner booth with the wolf skull on her vest. They walked straight to her. The leader was a man in his late 40s, slim, silver hair combed back from a high forehead, a face that was handsome in the way that a well-made knife is handsome, all edges and purpose, and the promise of something sharp behind the surface. His name was Prescott. Wren knew his name because she had heard his voice 3 months ago crackling through the speakerphone during a call to the compound. He had been delivering a message from his employers in Sinaloa. The message had been polite, reasonable, and underneath the politeness, lethal. Prescott slid into the seat across from Wren without asking. The other 2 men positioned themselves at the end of the table, standing hands clasped in front of them, blocking the aisle. It was a formation, subtle professional designed to communicate control without overt aggression. Ms. Calloway, Prescott said. His voice was smooth, modulated the voice of a man who had spent his career making terrible things sound reasonable. You're a hard young woman to find. Your guardians are very protective. Wren didn't look up from her burger. She took another bite, chewed, swallowed, wiped her mouth with a paper napkin. She took a sip of sweet tea. I'm not hard to find, Prescott. I'm right here, every Tuesday. Taco night. Prescott smiled. It was a thin expression, precise, deployed like a tool. We have a proposition. My clients have asked me to convey their desire to resolve the current situation amicably. The notebook your father left has been a source of considerable tension. It has disrupted business. It has damaged relationships. It has cost both sides time and money and, regrettably, human capital. He placed a briefcase on the table, black leather brass hardware. He clicked the latches. The lid rose. Inside, arranged in neat stacks secured with paper bands, were $100 bills. Rows of them, layers of them. More money than Wren had ever seen or imagined. The bills were crisp and new, and they filled the case with the flat ink and cotton smell of fresh currency. $2 million, Prescott said. Cash. Untraceable. Enough to walk away from this life entirely. Go to college. Buy a house. Start a business. Live the kind of life your mother would have wanted for you. Oh. You're a smart young woman, Ms. Calloway. You don't belong in this world. This is not an insult. It is a compliment. You are too intelligent for grease and gasoline. Wren looked at the money. $2 million. She thought about what it could buy. An education, a house with a yard, a life where she didn't wake up at 5 in the morning to stand post in the cold, a life where she didn't have to know how to field strip a carburetor or read the politics of a room full of armed men or calculate the odds of a man with a palm actually pressing the button. She thought about all of that for exactly 2 seconds. Then she looked up at Prescott. You think I'm here because I have nowhere else to go? Prescott's smile tightened by a fraction. I think you're a child who was placed in an impossible situation by a father who should have known better. And I think the men around you, however loyal they may be, are using you as a symbol rather than protecting you as a person. My clients are offering you a way out, a clean break, no strings. Wren set down her burger. She wiped her hands on the napkin, folded it neatly, and placed it on the table. Tell me about Sheriff Croft, she said. Prescott's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes shifted. A recalibration. Sheriff Croft had an unfortunate accident last week, Prescott said. His voice carried the appropriate tone of sympathy, precisely measured exactly as warm as it needed to be, and not 1 degree warmer. His brakes failed on a mountain road. A tragedy. These rural highways can be very dangerous. Wren held his gaze. The diner was quiet. Mabel had stopped wiping the counter. Dutch was standing in the kitchen doorway, his hand below the level of the pass-through window, close to the shelf where the shotgun rested. That wasn't an accident, Wren said. Prescott tilted his head. Life is full of risks, Miss Calloway. Brake lines deteriorate. Roads are unpredictable. People who involve themselves in complicated situations sometimes find that the complications follow them home. He leaned forward slightly. The polished veneer remained, but beneath it the blade was showing. Give us the book, Wren, or the next accident might happen closer to home. Maybe to the gentleman in the kitchen. He seems like a nice man, owns a small business, keeps to himself. It would be a shame if something happened to his establishment, or to the waitress. Mabel is it. She seems like a woman who has already had enough difficulty in her life. Prescott looked at Wren with the patient expression of a man who has delivered this kind of message many times and has never once doubted its effectiveness. The world is full of fragile things, Miss Calloway, and fragile things break. Wren was silent for a moment. She looked at Prescott. She looked at the 2 men standing behind him. She looked at the briefcase full of money. She looked out the window at the rain falling on the empty parking lot where her father's shovelhead stood alone under the awning. She thought about her father in the motel room, coughing blood, writing in his notebook until his hand wouldn't hold the pen, sending her south with a jacket and a lighter and a name, trusting her with everything because there was no one else left to trust. She thought about her mother, Claire, who had been a school teacher, who had once told Wren that the most important thing in the world is not what you have, but who stands beside you when you have nothing. She thought about Dutch, who had shot a man to save her life and then complained about the damage to his kitchen door. About Mabel, who had been terrified every day of her life until she wasn't, until a small silver pin gave her permission to stop being afraid. About Briggs, who had caught her when she fell and who had taught her how to adjust a carburetor and how to read a room and how to ride a motorcycle in a crosswind without panicking. About Lorraine, who had knitted her a scarf for Christmas and who called her every Sunday to make sure she was eating enough. About Rowan, who had knelt on a dirty diner floor because her father's name meant something to him that transcended logic and self-interest. Who had given her a chance to earn what most people would have simply given her. Who had trusted her judgment when she was 16 years old and asking him to take a risk that could have destroyed his club. Prescott was watching her. He was accustomed to watching people calculate. He was accustomed to the moment when the math overtook the emotion and the rational decision presented itself. $2 million was a powerful argument. Fear for the people you love was an even more powerful one. In his experience, everyone broke. It was just a matter of finding the right pressure point. You know, Wren said quietly, my dad told me about men like you. Prescott's eyebrow rose by a millimeter. He said, you think money can fix anything. He said, you walk into rooms with briefcases and smiles, and you think that because you can put a price on everything, everything has a price. Prescott's smile was still in place, but it had become a fixed thing, a mask that no longer moved with the face behind it. He also said, you think fear is a currency, that if you can make people afraid, you can make them do anything. It is a currency, Prescott said. His voice had lost its smoothness. The polish was cracking. It is the oldest currency in the world, Miss Calloway. Older than gold, and older than ghee. The man who can make another man afraid can make him do anything. No, Wren said. He can't. She reached into her vest. The 2 bodyguards moved. Their hands went inside their jackets, reaching for whatever was holstered beneath the charcoal wool. Mabel dropped behind the counter. Dutch's hand closed on the shotgun. But Wren didn't pull a weapon. She pulled out a phone, a cheap prepaid cell phone with a cracked screen and a single number saved in the contacts. She pressed the button. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Prescott looked at the phone. He looked at Wren. He opened his mouth to say something dismissive, something about the futility of calling for help, something about how his clients had anticipated every contingency. Then the sound started. It began as a vibration, a tremor in the floorboards so subtle that at first you thought you were imagining it. The coffee in the mugs rippled. The salt shaker on the table shivered. The glass panes in the window frames began to hum. Then the hum became a rumble, and the rumble became a roar. And the roar became something that transcended sound altogether and became a physical force, a pressure wave that you felt in your sternum and your jaw and the backs of your eyes. Headlights swept across the front of the diner. Not 2, not 10, not 20. Hundreds. A wall of white light that turned the rain into a cascade of silver fire and flooded the interior of the diner with a brilliance so intense that Prescott raised his hand to shield his eyes. Through the window, he saw them. They came from both directions on the highway, converging on the diner like two rivers, merging into a single unstoppable current. Iron wolves from 3 states. The Grim Reapers from Kansas City. The Ironside Brotherhood from Denver. The Devil's Disciples from Amarillo. Clubs that had ridden through the night, through the rain, through 500 miles of dark highway because a phone call had gone out and the phone call said one word. Tuesday. They filled the parking lot. They filled the shoulder of the road. They filled the lanes of the highway in both directions. The headlights were blinding. The engines were deafening. The chrome caught the neon light from Dutch's sign and scattered it in 1,000 directions like broken glass. Prescott stood up. The briefcase was forgotten. His composure, the decades of courtroom poise and negotiation discipline, and the carefully cultivated ability to remain calm while delivering threats on behalf of the most dangerous men in the Western Hemisphere, crumbled. Because this was not in the contingency plan. His clients had anticipated a girl with a notebook. They had not anticipated an army. At the front of the formation, standing beside the shovelhead, was Rowan Thorne. He was not mounted. He was standing in the rain, his white beard streaming with water, his duster coat open to reveal the pearl-handled revolvers in his belt, and in his right hand a shotgun held loosely at his side. He was looking at the diner window with an expression that was not angry. It was patient, the patience of a man who has been waiting for someone to make a mistake and has just watched them make it. Wren stood up from the booth. She was not tall. She would never be tall. She had her mother's frame narrow and light, built for endurance rather than force. But in that moment, standing in the diner where she had once been a terrified girl in a dead man's jacket, she occupied the room in a way that had nothing to do with physical size. It was presence. It was authority. It was the thing you earn when you have stood in the fire long enough that the fire becomes part of you. "You made a mistake, Prescott," she said. Her voice was not loud. She didn't need it to be. The engines outside spoke for her. The headlights spoke for her. The 400 men in the rain spoke for her. "You thought the book was the only thing protecting me. You thought the threat of exposure was my only weapon. You thought that if you could buy the book or scare me into giving it up, the problem goes away." She stepped out from behind the table. Prescott's bodyguards shifted, uncertain. They were trained for corporate confrontations, boardroom intimidation, the occasional physical altercation with a rival security team. They were not trained for this. "Nothing trains you for this. The book is just paper," Wren said. She pointed out the window at the wall of headlights in chrome and leather and rain. "They are the weapon." Prescott looked at her. He looked out the window. He looked at the briefcase. The $2 million sat there in its neat stacks, useless, impotent, a pile of paper facing down 400 men and the legacy of a dead legend who was more powerful in his grave than most men are in their prime. "Take your money," Wren said. "Leave. Drive back to Sinaloa or wherever your clients are drinking their coffee this evening and tell them the terms have changed." What terms? Prescott managed. His voice had gone thin. "The book stays where it is. Buried. Safe. Untouchable. It doesn't go to the FBI. It doesn't go to the newspapers. It stays in the ground like a landmine. And as long as it stays in the ground, everyone stays alive. Your clients, my people, the judges and the sheriffs and the captains whose names are in those pages. Everyone gets to keep breathing. She took a step closer to Prescott. He didn't step back, but the effort of not stepping back was visible in the tension of his shoulders. But if you come near Dutch again, Wren said, if you come near Mabel, if you come near any of my brothers, any of their families, any of their businesses, any dog or cat or goldfish that belongs to anyone I have ever ridden with, we will not send an email. We will not make a phone call. We will not hire a lawyer. She pointed out the window one more time. We will just come. The diner was silent except for the muffled roar of engines and the rain on the roof. Prescott looked into Wren Calloway's eyes and saw something that he had seen only a handful of times in his long career of representing dangerous men. He saw the absolute absence of bluff. He saw a person who meant every word she was saying with a certainty that went beyond calculation, beyond strategy, into something that was almost geological. Bedrock, the kind of conviction that cannot be purchased or threatened or eroded because it is not based on self-interest. It is based on love, and love, as the cartels had never learned and would never learn, does not have a price. Prescott grabbed the briefcase. He snapped the latches shut. He looked at his bodyguards, and they were already moving toward the door. This isn't over, Prescott said. It was a reflex. The thing you say when you have lost and cannot admit it. Yes, it is, Wren said. The three men pushed through the diner door and into the rain. They were immediately swallowed by the formation. 400 bikers on 400 machines, revving their engines, closing ranks around the lawyer, cheers like a living corridor of noise and steel. The men in their expensive suits scrambled to their black sedan. The polished shoes slipped on the wet gravel. The tailored jackets soaked through in seconds. They climbed into the car and slammed the doors, and the driver gunned the engine and the sedan lurched forward, threading through the gauntlet of motorcycles with the desperate urgency of a prey animal fleeing a pack. The taillights disappeared into the rain. The formation held for a long moment, engines rumbling a unified statement that needed no translation. Then one by one, the bikes began to peel off, rolling into the parking lot, shutting down the riders, dismounting, and heading toward the diner in groups of 3 and 4, shaking rain from their jackets, grinning the way men grin when they have shown up for something that mattered and done it well. Rowan Thorne was the last one through the door. He was soaking wet. His beard dripped onto the linoleum. His eyes were bright and his mouth was turned up at the corners in a wolfish expression that made him look 20 years younger. Did they take the deal, Rowan asked. Nope, Wren said. She was leaning against the counter now, her arms crossed. They didn't like the terms. Rowan laughed. It was a deep sound, full-bodied, the kind of laugh that comes from a man who has spent too many years being serious and has momentarily remembered what joy feels like. He walked over and clapped a hand on her shoulder. Good, he said. I was hoping they wouldn't. The boys were getting bored. He looked at her vest at the member patch over her heart. He nodded once, a small motion that carried enormous weight. Your father would have handled that differently, he said. Wren looked at him. How? He would have shot the lawyer in the kneecap before he finished his first sentence. Rowan shook his head. You've got more patience than he ever did, and that might be worth more than all his guns. The diner filled with bikers. Dutch opened the kitchen and Poole fired up every burner on the stove. Mabel moved through the crowd, pouring coffee and taking orders and smiling in a way she hadn't smiled a year ago. The jukebox played something loud and fast. The men ate and drank and told stories about the ride and about the look on the lawyers' faces and about the time the road was so dark between Amarillo and Elk City that the only thing you could see was the tail lights of the brother in front of you, and how that was enough, how that was always enough. Wren sat in her booth and ate her burger and listened. Briggs slid in across from her at one point, looking as wet and satisfied as a dog that had just chased a truck and won. You know they'll be back, Briggs said. Maybe not those three, but someone. The cartel doesn't walk away. I know, Wren said. In the book, it's leverage now, but leverage has a shelf life. Eventually they'll decide the cost of letting it exist is higher than the cost of coming for it. I know that too. Briggs looked at her. So what's the plan? Wren took a sip of her sweet tea. She set the glass down and turned it slowly on the tabletop, watching the condensation trail it left on the surface. "The plan is the same as it's always been," she said. "We ride. We look after our own. We don't start fights, but we don't run from them either. And if they come, they come. And they'll find us ready." Briggs studied her face. He had known her for a year. He had watched her go from a soaking, terrified child to a woman who could stare down a cartel lawyer without blinking. He had taught her how to ride and how to fight and how to read the subtle hierarchies of club politics. But he hadn't taught her this. This calm, this certainty. This had come from somewhere deeper than instruction. "You know what Emmett told me once," Briggs said, "back in '97 before everything went sideways. We were sitting at a bar in El Paso and I asked him what scared him. And he said the only thing that scared him was the idea that he might die without leaving something behind that mattered." Briggs looked at her. "I think he'd say he got that one right." Wren didn't answer. She didn't need to. She finished her burger, drained her tea, and left a 20 on the table. She stood up, pulled on her riding gloves, and picked up her helmet from the seat beside her. Matte black, unadorned except for a single thin gold stripe down the center that Lorraine had painted for her. "Ready to go?" she asked Briggs. He groaned as he slid out of the booth, his knees protesting the cold and the hours on the bike. "Getting old," Needle Wren said. "Getting wise," Briggs corrected. "There's a difference. Let's ride." They walked out into the rain. The parking lot was emptying, the visiting clubs mounting up and peeling out in formation, heading back to their own territories. Their own roads, their own versions of the same hard life. Taillights traced red lines through the downpour as they merged onto the highway and disappeared. Rowan was already mounted his touring bike, idling like a sleeping bear. He looked at Wren and nodded toward the shovelhead. Wren walked to her father's motorcycle. She ran her hand along the gas tank, feeling the cold chrome under her fingers. She remembered the first time she had seen this machine strapped to a trailer behind a broken-down truck, covered in a canvas tarp carrying the weight of a dead man's legacy across 100 miles of storm. She remembered being afraid of it, afraid of what it meant, afraid of the world it came from and the world it would take her into. She wasn't afraid anymore. She swung her leg over the seat. She settled her weight. She turned the fuel petcock and pulled the choke and reached down with her right foot and kicked the starter. The engine caught on the first try, a deep chest-thumping bark that settled into a rolling idle, the sound of a machine that had been built in 1978 and had outlived the man who rode it and was now carrying his daughter into whatever came next. Wren pulled on her helmet. She blipped the throttle once, twice, feeling the engine respond, feeling the connection between her right hand and the 600 pounds of steel and history beneath her. Briggs mounted up beside her. Rowan pulled forward to lead. The remaining Iron Wolves fell into formation behind them, a column of headlights and chrome stretching back into the rain. Wren looked at the diner one last time. Through the rain-streaked window, she could see Mabel wiping down the counter. She could see Dutch's shadow moving in the kitchen. She could see the corner booth empty, now still lit by the overhead fluorescent light. The booth where a girl had once sat shivering in a dead man's jacket, holding a secret she didn't understand, surrounded by men who wanted to take the only thing she had left. That girl was gone. She had walked into that diner as a child carrying her father's ashes and walked out as something else. Something forged in rain and grief and the terrible clarity that comes when you have lost everything and discover that you are still standing. Wren turned away from the window. She rolled the throttle and felt the shovel head surge beneath her, the rear tire biting into the wet gravel, and then finding the asphalt and pulling her forward out of the parking lot onto the highway into the rain and the dark and the long open road. As she pulled onto the highway, the rain hitting her visor in a steady rhythm, Wren thought about her mother, not about the way Claire had died. She had spent enough nights thinking about that. She thought about the way Claire had lived, the way she had stood at the kitchen counter, grading papers with a cup of tea, humming a song she could never remember the words to. The way she had told Wren on her first day of high school that the bravest thing a person can do is stand up for someone who cannot stand up for themselves. Claire Calloway had never worn leather. She had never ridden a motorcycle. She had never held a gun or stared down a man with a bomb. But she had raised a daughter who could do all of those things, and that Wren decided was its own kind of courage. Rowan rode at the front. Briggs rode at her left shoulder. The pack formed around her a phalanx of steel and leather, and the shared understanding that in this world you do not ride alone. You ride with your brothers. You ride with your ghosts. You ride with the memory of every man and woman who wore the leather before you and paid the price that the leather demands. Wren Calloway did not look back. She had learned in the hardest year of her young life that looking back is a luxury the living cannot afford. The dead stay where you put them. The road is always ahead, and the only thing that matters is who is riding beside you when the storm comes. The headlights cut through the rain. The engines roared in unison, a sound like rolling thunder, and the pack moved as one. A single dark river flowing west along the interstate, growing smaller in the distance until the taillights were just red pinpoints in the black, and then just a memory, and then just the rain. The legend of the gravedigger was over. It had been over for a year, sealed in the red Oklahoma clay on a hill above the river, marked by a headstone that said he kept his word. But the legend of the nomad's daughter was just beginning. And it was a legend that would be told in diners and clubhouses and on long stretches of empty highway for years to come. The story of a girl who walked into a room full of wolves wearing a dead man's jacket and walked out wearing her own colors. The story of a girl who was offered $2 million to betray her father's legacy and said no. The story of a girl who stared down a man with a bomb and a man with a briefcase and found that the second one was more dangerous than the first and beat them both. It goes to show you never really know who you're dealing with. That quiet kid in the corner booth, the one in the oversized jacket, the one you laughed at, the one you thought was nobody. She might be holding the keys to the kingdom, and she might just be the bravest person in the room. The rain kept falling on Oklahoma. It fell on the diner and the highway and the cemetery on the hill. It fell on the road stretching west into the darkness where 400 taillights had vanished. It fell on a world that was exactly the same as it had been the night before, except that somewhere on that road, a 17-year-old girl was riding a dead man's motorcycle into a future she had earned with her own two hands. And the rain didn't bother her at all.